Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What if Deku like OC becomes wanted criminal? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Everything felt off. Very off. Off in ways that they had never felt off before. My skin was crawling like it was made of 1,000 bugs all trying to eat each other in a desperate fit for survival. I exploded out of bed. The room around me was clean, far cleaner than my room had ever been in before, even when I first moved into someplace. Everything was clean. It was spotless to the point that even the early morning sun seemed to shine brighter against the floor than it did in the sky. I darted for a bathroom. I don't recall ever being attached to my room before, stripping away the clothes that I didn't remember buying, and turning the shower on full blast. The hot water turned to steam and filled the room in a matter of moments. The water burned so well, stopping the tingling sensation for just long enough for my mind to actually process what exactly I was going through at the moment. I had woken up in a bed that wasn't mine. This had only happened a handful of times in the past, namely at college, but unlike those times, I had woken up alone. The room I was in was completely alien and gave off a hospital-like feel with its cleanliness. To say nothing of the bathroom I was in. There wasn't a single sign of soap scum. It felt like this was the very first time this room had ever been used. Even my body felt weird. Like it wasn't mine. Because it wasn't. Memories of this world, of this body, mixed with my own, confusing them and mixing them around to the point where nearly everything was a jumbled mess that could hardly be relied upon. Knowledge of math, science, chemistry, and medicine all added to each other, building and strengthening each other before solidifying. The disorders were the real kicker though. A habit of being alone, the inability to make friends, antisocial tendencies, and many more compounded with each other, giving rise to a terrible feeling of hopelessness that reminded me of when I had been at my lowest. The sensitivity to germs was there as well, as was the need for everything to be clean, and the viewpoint that humans and other people were part of the problem. And quirks. Quirks were a disease. But the worst of it all was the paranoia. It ran rampant through me, consuming every thought and memory, corrupting it and consuming my ability to trust anyone ever again. Not even myself. Either one of the selves that I had once been. By the time my mind had finished trying to process what exactly was going on, my fingers were pruned from the exposure to water. Part of my mind told me that if I didn't start scrubbing right now, I wouldn't feel right. I needed to be clean. For the next few minutes, I stood there washing my new yet old body and slowly coming to terms with the situation I found myself in. Hello, the voice that spoke was not mine as I stepped out of the shower. The man looking at me back in the mirror was not me. Kai Chisaki. Everything was so tidy it felt a bit off. The button-up shirts were ironed flawlessly and made of a far nicer fabric than I thought possible. There was a drawer filled with them all neatly stacked on top of one another. Below them were the pants, again, made of a material I could hardly fathom that felt amazingly clean while also being just as sturdy as they needed to be. There was, of course, a sock and underwear drawer that looked like it belonged in a display case at some mall. The last drawer was dedicated to the various things that Kai needed to not feel like he was suffocating just by walking outside. There were gloves. A lot of gloves. They either came in black or white and were designed specifically to be as sanitary as possible. They were expensive, each pair costing as much as a month's rent. There were also masks. A flimsy pack of disposable masks was pressed into the corner for emergency use, but the custom-made masks that Kai had would have made him a fashionista during the COVID era. They were generally all black and fitted, but there was a white mask, a red mask, and a decorative black mask that had red lines to make it look like the mouth of a demon. No bird mask. Was this before all that? Or was that elsewhere? As I got dressed, gloves first, I evaluated my current circumstance. Physically, I was 100% Kai Chisaki, a near-irredeemable villain in the Boku no Hero world. But those things hadn't happened yet. Right now, I was 22 years old, 5 years younger than when Kai was introduced into the story. There were also no memories of Eri, aside from a few manga and anime scenes in my head. That was good. I wasn't a monster. Not yet, at any rate. Mentally, I was 70% me and 30% Kai, but the lines were blurred. It was mostly our pooled knowledge, experiences, and memories that took up most of that 30%, but there was also a lot of baggage. The most pressing of which was my newfound germophobia that had initially driven me into the shower this morning. But there was also a war being waged in my mind even as I sat here calmly. The original Kai was a cold, calculating sociopath, while I had a strong sense of ethics, and was a bit of an emotional wreck even at the best of times. With a deep breath, I finished tying my shoes and sat on the bed. The room was practical, with the only thing of note being the bed, storage, and computer. I stared blankly at a spot along the wall, focusing HRD on it for no real reason other than to give my eyes something to do. Either I died and got transported into this life, or this is one hell of a dream. The last few days for both me and Kai were blurry. Maybe he, or rather I, got hit by some quirk that just manifested me into his mind. If that was the case, was I permanent? Was I Kai but with a manufactured mind being forced upon him? How long until I vanished? Minutes? Hours? The buzzing sound of Kai's phone going off shocked me out of my thoughts, and I grabbed it almost automatically. It was an older-style flip phone, the standard kind of Yakuza affair. It was all they could get. Even with quirks and villains, the old anti-Yakuza laws were still in place that prevented Yakuza from purchasing newer phones that required a contract. What is it? My voice still felt strange to me. Kai, you sound better. I guess that means you're feeling better too, right? Did something happen to Kai before this? I nodded to no one before I grunted into the phone. Yeah, a bit. What exactly happened to me? Oh wow, that tussle must have done a real number to you if you don't remember. Still, the doctor said that after a bit of rest, you'd be fine, the quirk probably wouldn't last long, and you seemed fine, just kinda out of it. The voice continued, and it was at this point that I recognized it. Rikia Katsukame, Kai's obedient friend that treated him like an older brother. He was the giant muscle guy in the manga, right? The one that could absorb energy. I think Nijire fought him. Oh right. Kai didn't say thanks. I remember now. Anyways, the boss wants to see you as soon as possible, so make your way over. Got it, I replied before closing the phone and tossing it onto the bed. For a brief moment, I stared at the spot on the wall for a moment before I shot out of bed again and headed toward the small kitchen that acted as the entrance to my apartment. There I found a knife, long, clean, sharp, and good for chopping, and returned to my bed. I stared at the knife for a moment, its smooth, overly clean surface catching the reflection of my eyes as I turned it. Fiction. Reality. I needed to find some way to separate them. I had already felt pain when my skin crawled earlier as well as the sharp heat from the shower earlier, so there was no point in seeing if I felt pain. Because I did feel pain. But there was one thing I really needed to confirm before I stepped out into that world. I took the knife and sunk it deep into my pillow before dragging it along, cutting a clean, even shape in the memory foam material. It looked like freshly cut purple bread that was undercooked. I placed the knife down and grabbed at my glove, pulling my hand free before I touched the pillow. Overhaul, the name of Kai's quirk, was powerful. With a touch, he could unmake something or someone. At the same time, he could also recreate that thing in whatever way he pleased. This could turn the ground into a spiky hazard, or fully restore someone's body to their peak physical condition. It was powerful, dangerous, and versatile. It was truly a quirk that could do anything, including fixing my pillow. With a single touch, the pillow remade itself. I slid my glove back on and took a deep breath. My heart rate quickened and I found myself barely able to stand. Quirks are real. Even if I had a reason to be somewhere, even if I was supposed to be somewhere, I always had a problem with entering a place for the first time. Hell, it didn't even have to be for the first time. I still got nervous just going someplace knowing that someone was expecting me. And that feeling was twice as bad in Kai's body as it had ever been in mine. Assuming I actually had a body. The walk to the Shai Hasaikai headquarters had been a short one that left me with very little time to actually think. And I needed to think. Quirks were real. That meant that All Might was real. Hell, Kai remembered All Might. But that didn't mean anything. Well, it meant a lot actually. But I needed to know if my knowledge, Those things that I remembered from my time reading, watching, and hell, writing, Boku no Hero were true. I needed to predict the future. I needed some kind of irrefutable proof that I wasn't just some crazy mind construct that got stuck on Kai's brain either as an accident or on purpose. The easiest way to do that was to find Eri. She had to have been born by now. She had to. If she wasn't, then, well, I was that crazy mind construct quirk thingy. There were other things I could rely on as well. Kai's body moved on autopilot through the Yakuza base. The few men keeping guard did nothing to halt me. At worst they gave curt nods, at most they gave respectful bows. Their respect for Kai was unnerving, but it was easy to see how Kai was able to take complete control of the organization after the boss was dealt with. Especially when I considered his quirk. Life or death at a single touch. Hari Kurono, one of Kai's most trusted allies and the man that would be known as Chronostasis in the future, passed by me as I made my way up the stairs. Like Kai, he did not wear his signature mask, rather, his face was exposed, showing off his arrow-like hair strands he got from his quirk. We shared a brief nod before carrying on with our tasks. If it was important, Hari would tell me later. My heart raced as I approached the boss's office. In theory, it should be easy to deal with him. It was easy to be polite and respect people. It was second nature. But, if there was anyone who could tell that something was wrong with me, wrong with Kai, it would be the boss. The man had all but raised Kai and treated him like his own son. And not once did he think to use Kai as a tool, despite his quirk. I stopped in front of the door and steadied myself for a moment, the guard on either side of the door giving me a slightly puzzled look, before I gave the door a knock with the back of my knuckle. The door opened automatically, letting me into the boss's office. It was ornate, decorative, and very Japanese. It was a room that was filled with pride. The pride of being a Yakuza that still had their honor. It was so different compared to the sterile room that I had woken up in. The large ornate desk that dominated the center of the room was vacant, with only a few documents scattered on top of it. Moto Tenryu, the boss, stood over a crib, his stoic face etched into a deep frown that created new wrinkles by the moment. The long dry trails of tears framed his face as he stared at the child in the cradle. I didn't need to look into the crib to know who it was. But Kai did. I walked over to the crib and followed the boss's gaze downward to a small child, no more than 2 years old. She had bluish-gray hair and a short yellow horn that stuck out from above her right eye. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked to be on the verge of crying once more. It was Eri. I think I'm making her cry, I said as I stepped back away from the crib. I knew that child. I knew what Kai did to that child. I knew what Kai wanted to do to that child. Moto gave a short snort, not tearing his eyes from his granddaughter. Her name is Eri. A good name. I nodded slowly. I could feel my hand trembling. I should not be allowed anywhere near her. Where are her parents? Gone. Moto barely even shrugged. My daughter, her mother, left Japan a few hours ago. Refused to tell me where. And her father. I knew what happened to him. Moto gestured towards Eri. Her quirk, it activated just the other day. Her father was standing here just like I am and just vanished. Only his clothes were left. I took in a breath and held it for a second, waiting for him to speak again. He didn't. What do you want me to do? He shrugged, finally taking his eyes off of Eri long enough to make eye contact with me. He paused. Are you okay? Yeah, I lied. I'm fine, just a little out of it. Got hit by a quirk or something. Moto raised an eyebrow. Or something. It's nothing. I waved my hand. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it, boss. He gave a snort. Stubborn kid, what makes you think I want you to work for me while you're out of it? You're a doctor, you should know how dangerous that is, Kai. I stood my ground. I needed to leave this place. I needed to get as far away from Eri as I could. But I needed to help her. Just a bit. Just enough. I need you to find out what her quirk is. Moto looked back towards Eri. Find out how dangerous it is, find out what happened to my son-in-law. See if there's a way to bring him back. There wasn't. I'll get it done, I said softly. I already knew the answer, but I needed to find some way to make the results believable. How did Kai get the results the first time? The answer was probably her BLD. He was obsessed with it. Maybe there was some trick with his quirk that would allow him to isolate Aries' quirk factor that would allow him to rewind an apple or something. I'll need a bit of her BLD though. Moto stared at me for a moment before he nodded. Overhaul was as versatile as I had originally assumed it to be. Its rules were strange, esoteric even. For example, I could make an orange look like an apple, even giving it the same texture, but it would still taste like an orange. Which made sense, it was still an orange, just with a different shape and texture. If I knew enough about the sugars that made up an apple, I could probably make the orange taste like an apple. Restoration both did and didn't require knowledge. When I had taken a bite of the modified orange and then restored it, it turned to its modified state, but the bite in my mouth was still there, slowly being munched on as I enjoyed the taste. The second bite tasted just like the first. But I could restore the orange further, going from its modified form back into an orange even with a third bite taken out of it. It seemed strange to simply be able to create matter like that. It felt like it should be impossible. But, then again, this was a world where I could reduce glass to sand and then back again without having to use a forge. A world where a man can simply just blip out of existence. A lot of this was more or less confirmed by the memories that Kai had left me, but I had felt the need to test them on my own. The man really had the potential to do so much good, but instead, he went, "I don't want to cure cancer, I want to turn people into dinosaurs." I let out a long sigh while I sat in Kai's lab. It was sterile, brightly lit, and felt twice as oppressive as any doctor's office. The only thing that gave this room any sense of life within its pure, sterile environment was 02. Kai's white rat was the closest thing to a pet he had ever owned, and had been the subject of numerous painful experiences. For a good minute there, I vaguely wondered if 01 existed and if they were going under a new name. It would be like Kai to give an animal a quirk just to see if he could. He probably could, but the time scale for Nizu wouldn't really match up. Probably. A small test tube of BLD sat in the centrifuge, the machine spinning it around to separate it into its various parts and scanning them to see if there was anything in there that would give a clue for Aries' quirk. There must be, how else would he make those quirk-killing bullets? But why had I asked for her BLD? It felt like too much, didn't it? Sure, it made what I was going to say to him sound more official, but I could have found some other way to determine her quirk. I could have just asked for some saliva. That was close enough, right? It had plenty of our DNA in there. I could have just gone to their house and seen the man's clothes and made something up. I didn't need Aries' BLD. It just made things easier. The centrifuge finished spinning, and I pulled out the vial of Aries' BLD. The plasma, BLD cells, and platelets had all separated neatly within the vial. It followed the correct order as well, with plasma floating on the top, the white BLD cells and platelets floating in the middle, and red BLD cells at the bottom. But there was an extra component within the mixture. Quirk juice, I muttered, feeling some part of me groan at the absolutely terrible name I had just given Aries' BLD. I was pretty sure that the bluish specks within her red BLD cells were indeed what I was looking for. The manga never really went into too much about how Kai was using Aries' BLD to make his bullets, but this seemed like a start. And it would only take him several years to actually get them working. I took a deep breath and turned my attention back to the orange that I had been brutally experimenting with for the last couple of hours. I wonder how long a reasonable amount of time would be for me to tell the boss what Aries' quirk was. I wondered what I was going to suggest. I placed my hand over my mask and scratched it ever so slightly with my gloved hand, creating a texture that was warped but satisfying. Part of me expected someone to come busting through the door and harass me about something. But perhaps Kai had built up a reputation for not wanting to be disturbed while he was within this lab. It was honestly relatable. Putting my hands back onto the desk, I grabbed the vial of Aries' BLD and began the extraction process, which consisted of using my quirk while holding an empty vial to combine the two vials and their substances into a form where one had Aries' normal BLD, and the other had the quirk juice. This SHT was broken. From there, I began to examine the quirk juice under a microscope. They were cells, red BLD cells to be exact, that were just carrying whatever latent energy that powered Aries' quirk. There was a decent chance that meant that certain types of food would charge her quirk faster. I introduced some dead bacteria to the cell and watched as the quirk juice first brought it back to life, allowing the bacteria to attempt to attack the red BLD cells, only for it to start to shrink, going through the stages of its life before vanishing as though I had never even put it there. Science was pretty neat. But I could see why it took so long for Kai's plan to really happen. I had the benefit of knowing what result I was looking for, and I wasn't trying to target a specific thing like a quirk factor. Even if I wanted to, making those quirk-erasing bullets would take a long time, mostly trial and error, as I tried to get it to only remove someone's quirk factor. Before I could run more tests, the energy in Aries' quirk juice had vanished, returning it back to normal red BLD cells. Right, it wasn't just targeting, but also stabilizing the quirk juice that would have taken quite some time. Didn't the original bullets only last a few days? Even that would be a feat. The more I thought about it, the more I was getting impressed by how Kai managed to turn BLD into an actual weapon. But it didn't have to be a weapon, it could. That admiration froze into a chilling fear that I could feel crawling its way through my body, freezing me in place. My ears began to ring and I found it difficult to focus. What was I thinking about? What was I just thinking about? The pen falling from my fingers gave me just enough of a shock to kickstart my brain again, allowing me to think normally. Well, normal since this morning, which was a good thing. I grabbed a new pen and began to jot down notes. Instructions. Instructions about how to care for Eri to the best of my knowledge. My speculation about her quirk being fueled by something, the few ins and outs I knew from her quirk from the manga disguised as speculation from my results, and a recommendation about what to do with her. I stared at the notes for a few moments. The person I was before this would have wanted to do something to make sure that Eri got the help she needed, and that she'd be able to live a happy life. I wasn't sure if it was my stubbornness to make sure I was still that person that drove me, or if it was genuine concern over Eri's well-being. Or if I was acting purely to spite Kai. Did it matter if Eri got the help she needed? It mattered so much, which is why I was doing things now. But I still needed to do them first. I grabbed my notes and made my way toward the boss's office, not stopping for anyone as I moved through the base even as they called me by name. Eri was still in the boss's room when I barged in. She was already crying, and an unfamiliar woman was currently trying to settle her down. A nanny. The boss stood facing towards the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a storm brooding just on the horizon, waiting and wanting to take action and strike at something, but unsure where to strike. Kai? Moto asked as he turned. What's wrong? You look... Sorry, I apologized for no reason. Sorry, I just germs? Moto's brow furrowed and he tilted his head to the side. Are you sure? You look really pale. Yes. I took a long, steady breath, trying to fight away the fact that I wanted to run away as fast as possible. I needed to get out of here. The only crime I had ever committed before now was going 5 over the speed limit and a bit of piracy. There was no way I could actually be a Yakuza. Even a Yakuza doctor. It wasn't who I was. With a deep breath, I walked towards the boss's desk and placed down my notes on it. Her quirk, I muttered. I shook my head and tried again. Her quirk. My voice was firmer now. Is powerful. His brow furrowed and he stepped towards the notes. That was fast. I knew what to look for. What is it exactly? Moto asked as he grabbed the paper, his face scrunching up. Did your handwriting get worse? No, but technically yes. It's rewind. I gestured towards Eri. She can rewind someone's time. This means that she can effectively heal broken bones by returning the body to the point where it was no longer broken, including pretty much anything, as she sets you back to that time. But she can also go too far, Moto realized, glancing at his granddaughter. Rewinding a person to a point before they ever existed? Upon hearing those words, the nurse held Eri at arm's length, placing her gently into her crib. That's right. I watched it happen to some bacteria I introduced to her BLD sample. Her quirk completely revived the dead sample first, and then made it blip. Blip? Right, they didn't have Infinity War in this universe. Vanish. Moto gave a grunt, turning his eyes to the notes once more. You think it's fueled by something? Yes, whatever fuels her quirk is in her BLD, so it's probably going to be some kind of a food. My guess would be fruit or something that she was introduced to recently. I resisted the urge to scratch the back of my head. I was no stranger to giving presentations. But this, standing in front of a Yakuza boss, this was more unnerving than anything I'd ever done before. Well, besides waking up this morning, I'll send someone to their house, Moto grunted. See if there's some new baby food. It could actually be anything. 2 is generally the age when babies start to eat people food. Thank you, AA in childcare. Moto nodded again and then placed the note down. Thank you, Kai. You've been a big help today. A feeling of pride as well as a desperate need to pay a debt swelled in my stomach before I choked it down. I needed to do what needed to be done. I don't think she should stay here. Moto only raised his eyebrow, but the storm of anger hidden behind his eyes was frightening. I know she's family. She's your family. But being raised here, in the middle of a Yakuza hideout, that can't be good for her. We're on thin ice as it is. At any time, the government could just decide to get rid of us. I felt anger rise in me. The heroes and villains have put us in this position. Moto's anger seemed to vanish as he closed his eyes. After a deep breath, he pushed his chair back and sat down at the desk. What do you suggest we do then? What's best for Eri? I said softly. It was the honest truth at this point. She needs to be raised by people who will love her while helping her with her quirk. It is a dangerous quirk, but with control, it can be so wonderful. There had to be some kind of a program that would help her like that, right? Moto leaned back in his chair and hummed. I'll consider what you've said. With an unspoken word, he commanded me to leave, and I obliged. I needed to get out. I needed to vanish, to never be seen again, so that they couldn't find me and bring me back. The boss would probably hate me for this. It might even be a blow that's too great for him, and he'll end up holding on to Eri tighter. But that was his right. She was his family. And I was the monster under the bed that needed to be as far away from her as possible. I stumbled into my apartment, quickly searching the place for things that I knew weren't there, hoping to find stuff that I could use to get out of here. Kai kept very little spare cash on him, and even less in his apartment. It was barely enough for a few weeks at a hotel, and even less to start a new life. Everything he wanted, the Kai Chisaki had supplied him, which was in theory great, but terrible for what I needed to do. I stuffed the essentials into a pillowcase, the clean freak in me swearing at me for not using the DMN suitcase under the bed. But that would be foolish. Kai would use the suitcase. If I took it, they would know to look for me someplace safe. If I didn't, they would assume something was wrong. That I was just gone. They would ask the police, accuse other gangs, or assume the worst when I just vanish. I needed them to think that I hadn't just left on my own accord. Maybe I should have bought a backpack on my way back. No, maybe someone would have seen me. Toothpaste, 3 unopened, never-used toothbrushes, a lot of soap, a set of clothes, and a container of disposable masks and gloves as well as my more durable sets were all placed into the pillowcase in a haphazard manner that left me feeling deeply unsettled. I needed to do it, I needed to put up with it. New life, a life away from Eri and away from the Yakuza. It shouldn't be too strong. I didn't have enough cash to flee the country without help, and even if I did have the cash for it, Yakuza weren't allowed to fly. I needed to make money, but I also needed to hide. If I went to the authorities, they'd just throw me in jail. It'd take a long time for them to let me out, even with good behavior, due to my past. I couldn't get help from the good guys, and I couldn't stay with the bad guys. I dropped the pillow and fell to the floor. What on earth am I going to do? Why did I have to end up as Kai? Couldn't it have been literally anyone else? Hell, Endeavor, despite being a massive prick, would be a better choice. At least he had a home and family, even if it was broken. If only I could have a choice. I glanced toward one of the masks I had dropped in my hurry. It was the black one with the red trim to make it look like an Oni mask. It had been a GG gift from a few years ago that Kai had never worn, but he hadn't thrown it out either. The mask was high quality. It could be useful as a backup. I blinked slowly as an idea formed in my head. I pushed aside the rational thoughts in me telling me that it was a terrible idea and that I should just go back to the boss. Hell, I didn't even have to go back. I hadn't done anything wrong by him yet. So I should just forget all this running away nonsense and just stay with the Kai Chisaki. I scrambled up and flung myself into the bathroom where I stared at my face. At Kai's auburn hair, at his small golden eyes. At the mask I had worn today. I pulled it off my face, letting it hang from one ear as I bit at the thumb of my glove, pulling it off and dropping it to the counter. With a deep, steady breath, I touched my face. And screamed. No ID. No credit. No license. No home. No car. No identity. Very little sanity and a whole host of mental health problems that were telling me that maybe if I just stayed in my sterile space, I'd be totally okay with potentially committing crimes and/or atrocities. I wasn't convinced. I was even less convinced with my disguise. If it could even be called a disguise. The pain of completely remaking my entire body, even my genetic makeup, still echoed throughout my entire body, so I was in no rush to try and improve what I had given myself in my panic. I placed a gloved hand onto the sink of the public bathroom and took in a long, shaking breath that was not making things any better. I could already feel my skin crawl just by being here, but I desperately needed some place to breathe, think, and perhaps most importantly, reflect. I snapped my eyes upwards and was greeted by a vaguely familiar face obscured by the mask I had secured. Around my face. Trying to come up with an entirely unique face was strong, especially in the seconds I had before I had made the choice to remake myself, so rather than making myself look like another character that I knew existed, like Izuku, Katsuki, Shoto, or Gang Orca, I had gone for something similar. An old OC of mine. A pair of horns stuck out from my forehead, extending several inches above the rest of my head, framing my long white hair so that it stayed out of my eyes, which were a mismatched red and blue. I was roughly the same height as before, perhaps half an inch shorter, but that was made up for in other areas. Like the horns. And hips. And CHST. I moved to touch my mask and felt them shift just under my shirt. The makeshift BR that I had made with my own shirt was clearly lacking in some way or another. I really should have tried to make myself look like a male character. I could have made myself look like me, the original me, but for whatever reason, that was a blurry and far-off concept that just wormed itself back into being Kai. Still, I touched my mask gently with my gloved hand. Objectively speaking, I was incredibly attractive, which could be helpful. There's no way I'm doing that again. Having bub was weird, but remaking my entire body, hell, even just a part of my body, was not an option unless completely necessary. Which it wasn't. For the time being, I was stuck being Ori Yamato, an OC from one of my fanfics who was essentially a Yakuza princess. Fortunately, I highly doubted that I was in my own fanfic. That would be just one too many layers deep, and Kai had no memories of the Amagi. Still, her good looks would aid in the plan I was slowly developing. I coughed and glanced towards the door, making sure no one was about to enter before I began to speak. Hello, I am Oriana. I could still speak perfect English as well as Japanese. With a smile that nearly turned into a retch, I rushed into one of the nearby stalls. They were a lot cleaner than the American ones I was familiar with. Which was good. But they were still disgusting, germ-filled public-use areas that made my skin crawl. Were it not for my mask, my dry heave would have turned into something a bit more moist and chunky. For the past day, I had been eating and then restoring the same protein bar. I started with my clothes, turning them from the nice dress shirt and pants I was wearing and into more casual clothes that were too big and looked like they had seen far nicer days. The two large pants were tied with a frayed rope, and my shoes were replaced with a pair of flip-flops that looked like they were about a day away from retirement. My makeshift BR was turned into a manacle around my ankle that had the chain melted off. The change to my mask was simple. I placed a lock on the back that would require a key that was never made or basic wire cutters. The cash that I had stolen from Kai. Could I steal from myself? The cash was changed to look like the kind of currencies that I had experience with. The British PND, Canadian, American, and Australian dollar, Mexican peso, and Thai baht. Anything to make it look like I wasn't really from a single place. The bills, of course, were damaged beyond use, but still identifiable, with them being stuffed into my gloves. Lastly, my gloves, my precious, precious gloves. Those I turned into a large pair of mittens that were tied together by a zip tie so I couldn't move my arms properly, limited to just kind of flailing them about like a club. Altogether, I looked like someone who hadn't come here willingly. As to how exactly I ended up in Japan, well, I'd leave that up to my saviors. With a deep breath, I prepared myself to charge out of this isolated public restroom in a panic. The best part was I didn't even have to pretend to be in a panic. I've been doing that for the past day and a half. I just needed to let it show. Tears fell from my face as I let the floodgates open. Why me? Why was I here? Why did I end up in Kai's body? Was I even real? Why did I leave the boss like that? What was I going to do? How was I going to survive? With a muffled scream, I slammed into the stall door, darting past a woman who was busy washing their hands while talking on their phone. Time to run into traffic. I sprinted through the park. I had found an hour or so walk away from Kai's apartment. The looks that people gave me were equal parts concern, fear, or pity. By the time I got to the busy intersection, my right flip-flop had snapped, so I was running half barefoot. Compared to the pain of remaking my body, the rough sidewalk was nothing. The fact that it was filthy, that was what burned. I could feel the hives spreading across my body as I touched more and more unclean things. A man had even tried to grab me as I sprinted towards the intersection, and the shriek that came out from me was very unintentional, as I felt my body begin to break out even more than before. I didn't fight against the panic, against the longing to be clean. If anything, it was pushing me forward, pressing me towards whatever good graces would get me a clean room tonight. And a fresh, clean slate. Horns blasted at me the moment I stepped into the intersection. My confusion became genuine, and my panic became even more real. I was no longer acting. The lights began to choke my vision. My ears were buzzing. My skin was crawling. I heard the screeching of car brakes and the sound of a horn that was deeper than it should be. A car bumped into me with enough force to push me away, but not enough to actually hurt me. Probably. What little sense I had was busy screaming at me for putting myself in this scenario. There was no possible way I was actually sane if I actually thought that running into traffic was a good idea. At least my story would be believable. Something grabbed me around the waist. Something big. My body was lifted from the ground, higher and higher. I was higher than the trees of the park, and then higher than the buildings. Panic eased just a bit. Apparently, I wasn't afraid of heights. I glanced at the giant claw of a hand that was wrapped around my waist. An exposed melons was resting on top of the knuckle. When did that happen? The claw was covered in rough gray scales that felt like sandpaper. A second claw joined the first, securing me tighter as I saw a massive pair of wings begin to flap faster. I turned my gaze upward and saw an inhuman sight. A dragon. An actual dragon had swooped down and grabbed me off the street and was currently flying away with me like it was the most normal thing in the world. Unlike its scales, the dragon's head looked like it had roughly the same tone and texture as human skin. A bit of blonde hair stuck out from beneath a metallic plate that covered half its face. "Don't worry." It spoke in a rough feminine voice that overpowered the wind. "You're safe now, so calm down." My scream was again genuine. But some part of my mind said, "Oh neat, Ryukyu." Ryukyu had brought me to her agency, or maybe what would be her agency. Really, it looked like it was the top floor of some shorter office building. The main room I was sitting in was an open studio space, where the kitchen was separated from the rest of the area by a thick blue curtain and a table that served more as storage than a place to eat. The trash can was completely filled with convenience store food and takeout, with only a few fruits and instant ramen cups sitting on the kitchen counter. Various fabrics, half-completed projects, and finished pieces were tossed haphazardly over a workstation, with numerous clothing racks on wheels creating a very low maze of artificial rooms. A large, pure white cloth hung from one wall and was surrounded by lights and a few fans with a couple of cameras hanging from a nearby stand. The main draw of the area, however, was the large, L-shaped sofa haphazardly placed diagonally in the room. It was joined by an unaligned coffee table and an off-center TV. The whole area looked like it was the most lived-in area of the building, with there being a large blanket and pillows dominating the couch, while the table had varying degrees of stuff on it, like bras, water bottles, and food. It was basically a fashionista's bachelorette pad. Just with the added launch pad for a front yard where Ryukyu had landed with me a few minutes ago. Ryukyu guided me to the middle of this collection of half-finished rooms and sat me down on a large stool near the storage table. Sit right there, though. She held a hand out to me. I'm going to cut you free, all right? I attempted to reply in English, but my mask kept me muzzled so I could only make a few desperate moans and groans as I looked around the room frantically. It was strong to keep my eyes off of her. The anime and manga really didn't do her justice. She, as a human, was completely breathtaking, like just unfairly appealing. But as appealing as she was as a human, she was just as terrifying as a dragon. Thankfully I didn't see the shift, otherwise I'd probably have nightmares. Not that I wasn't going to have those anyway. It's going to be okay, Ryukyu continued in a soft, pleasing voice. They can't hurt you anymore, you're safe now, okay? Even as she said that, I could still feel my heart racing as I kept my eyes on her. I took a breath and watched as she dug through a cabinet. I don't understand you. I tried to speak English again, but my mask stopped me from doing much more than mumbling. Hold on, I can't understand you with that thing on. She pulled out a pair of clippers, the kind that looked like they could eat a bridge for lunch. There we go. She moved behind me, and I heard her make a snip-snip noise with the clippers, and I ducked to the side, avoiding her grip while remaining firmly planted in the chair. Okay, so, maybe you can't understand me. Great. She took a breath and walked in front of me. She stared at me for a moment and gave me a kind smile. You really do have pretty eyes, huh? She kneeled down, slowly placed a hand on my knee, and pointed towards my gloved hands. May I? I looked at the clippers, then towards the zip tie holding my gloves together, and nodded slowly. She snipped the tie easily and began to pull my gloves off. I felt the urge to resist for a moment, but pushed it down. I needed her to think I was trusting her. Which I was. But a small part of me was terrified. What if I touched her? It would be so easy to just make her vanish. It was just a touch. What did they stuff these with? Ryukyu raised an eyebrow as she saw a few destroyed dollars slip from my mittens. Dollars? Huh, well, so far, you're not understanding Japanese is becoming more likely. You're certainly pretty enough to be taken. Was I feeling bad for manipulating and lying to her? Was I still going to do it because the thought of being in the Yakuza and near Eri was terrifying to me? Absolutely. I'd make it up to her somehow though. Hopefully. Okay, she tapped on her chin and slowly rose up from the ground. Bonjour, parlez-vous français? French. Was she asking me if I spoke French in French? I didn't, but I knew what that meant. I'm pretty sure most Americans can say that as just some weird relic that gets implanted into our minds by cartoons or something. I was half tempted to respond to her, but instead, I just tilted my head to the side looking at her confused. Yeah, me neither, she said calmly and then pointed toward my mask. This next okay? I gave a small nod. To say I tensed up when she walked behind me would be an understatement. I felt like a kitten that had the stuff of their neck grabbed, and my skin began to crawl as she began to pull my hair out of the way until she saw the back of my mask. Wow, they really didn't want you to speak. Ryukyu gave a laugh as she tugged at one of the strings of my mask. I had made them so tight that she struggled to get a finger underneath one. Maybe you got some really juicy secrets, After 2 snips, my mask was flung to the ground. I missed it already. There we go, so what do you say? She walked in front of me and smiled sweetly. Hello? I asked, confused. Where am I? Ryukyu let out a sigh, her shoulders dropping, and she tossed the clippers onto the storage table. English, it had to be English. She coughed into her hand and then touched hers. Hello, my name is Ryuko. Her English was rough, but cute. What is your name? I was going to say Oriana, but there was a lot that she was saying about being captured. What would happen if they asked me for information? I'd have to lie. And what if my lies led to nothing? Or worse, led to something? I don't know. The cool part was that I wasn't lying. I really didn't know who I was. Sure, I knew the bits that made me me, but the whole. I had no idea, and that's what terrified me. You don't know your name, she repeated in English. I nodded. Where am I? Japan. Japan. Oh, she said softly, staring at me for a moment before her shoulders slumped. Well, she began speaking in Japanese again. Things just got that much worse. Not only were you abducted, but you don't even know who you are. Lovely. What? I asked. Sorry, she said slowly in English. I don't speak English well. I'm sorry. That just kind of slipped out. It okay? She asked slowly. She held out her hand, holding it up for me to wait before she moved towards the coffee/actual food table near the couch and grabbed a cell phone. She tapped on it for a moment before she coughed. Okay, you are safe now. Please, wait while I call the police for you. I assumed that police was the police or someone whose quirk was to make poles cold enough to get my tongue stuck to it. She looked at me for a moment before she typed in her phone again. Also, let me give you some clothes. Okay. I nodded, giving her a thumbs up. I completely forgot that at some point my shirt had torn, so I was just sitting there with varying degrees of exposed. Ryuko smiled softly and walked towards the racks of clothing she had, her phone pressed against her ear by her shoulder. Yeah, hi, Officer Satoshi. Yeah, it's me, Ryukyu. I'm a hero that just moved into this area not too long ago. Right? Yeah, the one that turns into a dragon. Well, you see, I saved someone that looked like they were having a rough time, even going into traffic screaming. No, they weren't using their quirk. Well, their mouth was gagged and their arms were bound, and she's wearing rags. She even has a chain around her ankle. Ugh, she didn't give me a name. She actually doesn't remember anything. At least that's what I've gathered. She doesn't speak Japanese, only English, and I'm not great at it. Oh really? That's great, I can bring her in soon. Just let me give her some clothes. A description. Okay, well, the biggest thing is that she has 2 horns sticking out from her forehead. Forgot I had those. And she has snow-white hair, with one eye being ruby red and the other sapphire blue. She paused and grabbed a blue top. Oh, that will go lovely with them. No, I haven't seen her use her quirk. Her hands were bound and covered in mittens though, so I think she might have one. I don't think she knows though. Her memory loss looks pretty solid. As she spoke, I started to touch the storage table, moving slowly, and I was making sure not to activate my quirk even though I was directly touching something. It was kind of like trying to type something normally, but the sticky key command kept popping up. Eventually, I hit yes, turning on sticky keys and turning the table from its wooden self into one made out of pure sapphire. Oh, she's a bit on the tall side, probably about 5 feet 10 inches. Not counting the horns. And just absolutely stunning. I bet this would look great on her. Oh sorry. I'm just trying to make sure she's practically naked right now, so Ryuko stopped talking from behind me for a moment and I turned to look at her. Her mouth was hanging open as she stared at the table. She quickly grabbed the phone and held it up to her ear. Sir, about her quirk. Well, she just turned my table into a gem. So, I think she might have been the target of a quirk napping. Right, let me dress her and I'll bring her to the station right away. I get to keep the table though, right? I honestly couldn't remember the last time someone had actually dressed me. But apparently I should do it more often. Or at the very least, I should let a fashionista like Ryuko dress me more often. Because even though I had shown up wearing basically rags, she had dripped me out in less than half an hour. A pair of wide-legged pants went all the way up to my waist, while the thick, long-sleeved satin top went down to my thighs while leaving my shoulders exposed. A heavy beige coat that went down to my knees completed the look, while a pair of orange-tinted sunglasses obscured my eyes. A wool beret kept my hair mostly in check while stopping just above my horns. There was also a pair of Altature gloves that I had managed to convince her to give me through a series of grunts and pointing at my hands. All in all, it was as much a passion project for Ryuko as it was a disguise for me. All right, she patted my arms and smiled sweetly at me. Now no one will recognize you. Well. She reached up and tapped on my horns, unless they're looking for your horns. She stepped back and tilted her head to the side, rubbing her chin slightly. You're just tall enough to pull off the long girl look well, and the horns really help with that. Maybe a neck accessory. Shame we couldn't put you in something a bit more daring, but without a proper BR, that would be too risky. I felt my cheeks redden. It was probably my collective 40+ years of being a dude between me and Kai, but having someone compliment and fuss over me felt, well, quite frankly, I had no idea if she was just complimenting me or flirting with me, but either way this whole encounter was going into the permanent memory locker. I also felt my skin crawl at the idea of wearing clothes that, while they had been washed, had probably been sitting in a studio apartment, where there was a half-eaten bowl of ramen just sitting there. Part of the reason why I was wearing a coat was both for the weather, but also to hide the fact that my melons were currently being supported by binding tape. Anyways, Ryuko began to stuff the remnants of my old outfit into a takeout bag, pausing only halfway before her shoulders slumped. Probably shouldn't have touched the evidence. Neat, she was doing my job for me. Well, nothing to it now, just have to deal with it. Once my stuff was collected, she stood in front of me, offering me a wide, cheerful smile before she began to tap on her phone again. She spoke in rough English. Let's go get you help. The police. Me help you. I nodded and spoke slowly. Okay, Ryuko. Jude, you're cute? She muttered into her phone. Station is close.